From time to time, we will bring you a repeat show. This is an episode from our extensive back catalog, resurfacing some of the ideas and thoughts from the past that we believe are still relevant and well worth revisiting. In this UX Podcast Classic, with sensory design consultant Alastair Somerville, we talk about what human-centered design truly means. By using your senses and perception to take in the world around you, you can become more attuned to considering how our humanity fits into the often misguided struggle of repeatedly simplifying interfaces.
UX Podcast Episode 306.
You're listening to UX Podcast, coming to you from Stockholm, Sweden. I'm James Roy Lawson.
I'm Per Axbom.
With listeners in 172 countries, from France to Hong Kong.
And today we are talking to one of my favorite thinkers, Alastair Somerville. He's a sensory design consultant, usability researcher, and workshop facilitator.
Alastair joined us for a brief interview back in episode 105 about sensory design.
And in this show, we talk around human-centered design and how we as humans perceive everything through a lens, also described in the show as a threshold when experiencing the world around us. So your workshop, Alastair, was really physical, not only in the sense that we walked outside a lot, but also with the work we did with the Jenga blocks. So as you were speaking, we were arranging Jenga blocks in a way to help us understand what you were saying about spaces and the physicality of our world and how we make decisions and how we move around. It was insanely powerful. So tell us more about this thing of being present in the moment, the importance of being outside and taking in the world.
Yeah, I think when the Jenga blocks were purchased for the later on in the workshop originally, in terms of using them for a model which is able to actually create a three-dimensional representation of how we perceive information and what meaning information content has, which came out of accessibility projects which I've worked on, where we've had to find a way of describing to people how there is a difference between how people with different sensory and cognitive capacities encounter and perceive information and how the actual sort of meaning exists, and that you need to be able to move the two things apart. But when I was designing the workshop and when I was looking at the necessity of having a model to talk about how a human-centered concept of human perception works, there was this issue that I was looking at a workshop where there was going to be about 20 to 30 minutes of me pointing at PowerPoint and people writing diagrams. And I knew that wasn't going to work, in a sense that it was neither going to be interesting, nor was it going to actually achieve a useful purpose in trying to guide people to understanding how being embodied in a space surrounded by information, which, I mean, the workshop was called Walking Through Information, how that sense worked. And so, given I was surrounded by 11 boxes of Jenga at the time, I began to realize that there might be a way of building the diagram out of the blocks. So it was only about the last week or two that I started shifting.
So this was completely new.
It was about a week or two, yes. It was completely new, in a sense that previously the diagrams had been literally just sort of two-dimensional diagrams. Actually, I mean, there are some 3D models which I worked with, and which did sort of, if anyone watches my Twitter, they will see there are 3D models which I did build, paper prototypes, but they were all too complex and they were too hard to construct during a workshop. So the Jenga, I already had it. So it was staring at it and thinking, actually, I can easily create a diagram in the blocks. And it therefore means that I can enable the participants of the workshop to build the model with me and physically see the meaning of what I'm talking about, because those are the strongest images and the sort of the images which most interested me was the images where people are looking through the thresholds.
Exactly.
Yeah, and the threshold you built with so you made doorways
Yeah.
from the Jenga blocks to represent thresholds that you
And we
see through.
had a Lego figure to actually represent the person looking through.
Yeah,
So,
and I thought that was
yeah.
it was compared to just a two-dimensional sketch. It was a very good way of making you think and understand about spaces, because this was something then that stuck up from your paper and represented literally a portal into somewhere else you look through.
This idea that we're permanently moving through information, whether the information be in a threshold which is a physical doorway, and in a physical space, or whether it be a threshold which is framed as a device in our hand. It doesn't. It's all perception. It doesn't matter. But humans move through these thresholds. They look for information. They look for meaning, and they choose to go through. And again, that sort of whole idea of the figure moving through, moving across the table, moving through the spaces of information. That was what I was trying to get at, because sort of most of the way in which the two-dimensional use of post-it notes, the two-dimensional use of diagrams, doesn't truly represent a useful way of explaining embodied movement through information. And so, yes, but it was very, very late on in the process of designing the workshop that it came to me.
It was also, I think, forcing us to slow down and actually take in the information, because it was like you could have walked us through it in PowerPoint in 5 minutes, basically. But it was like you talked 1 minute, then we worked for 2 minutes on the blocks, then you talked. So we were really, really focusing on what you were saying, and really by it being represented in 3D as well, really understanding it. I would not have understood it as well if you had just told us about it. Obviously, but that was an amazing experience. Actually, I'm gonna steal it.
But it's one thing that was interesting. Many things interesting, but one thing I took away from looking at the workshop was how it doesn't immediately come across as something practically useful. So the exercise of like exploring spaces, when you think about your work anyway, that you're exploring these spaces and then making a 3D diagram of portals and thresholds, that didn't immediately come across as something I can apply to my work. But what I did find incredibly refreshing and enlightening was the practicing being in the moment, practicing going out and exploring spaces, so heightening my curiosity and observation skills. That was maybe a bit more unexpected from the workshop. So used to workshop delivering concrete skills, this is the thing you now apply to your daily work.
Yeah, I mean, I generally, I mean, certainly with all the sensory user experience workshops and the emotional design workshops, which I do, in general, I mostly warn people that no workshop anyone comes to with me will be of use to them at work on Monday after the conference. And that's fine, because for the most part, most conferences have a habit of teaching people tools and processes which are relevant to the work process and relevant to the workplace on Monday. I try to operate in a slightly different space, in the sense that I'm trying to talk to people about their individual sense of themselves, to change their sense of how they exist and how they think about how they are, in order that then they can go back and share that sense of being with other people. So it's and that's why you have these things like sending people out to just listen to the waves and kick the leaves around and all the rest of it, because for the most part people don't have time for that, because it's not part. I mean, it's a really important part of being human, and yet it's not something which is part of most work processes. So you've got to find time and work. This is one of the reasons I do conference workshops. It's a good time to give people time to do the things that matter but don't have value as far as corporations are concerned.
Yeah, my favourite slide from the presentation was the be like the dog.
Yes, I mean, there's
Be more like the dog.
the sort of, yes, the photo. I mean, that was again when I was doing the reconnaissance walks the day before to try and work out where people could go. Yes, I was following this guy, and it was very clear he was just staring at his phone, but his dog was just wandering around, sniffing, kicking the gravel, all the things. The dog
Taking
was
in
in the
his
moment
environment.
of experience, taking in the environment, while the man was distracted by his mobile. And it's that thing of, can you actually recapture the sense of being a person in an environment? Because you need that baseline of being in the world before you can start talking about how the overlays of information that we place both badly and well into the environment work.
So are you saying that we're forgetting to be human almost?
I find that we are minimizing the experience of what it is to be human, because by minimizing what it is to be human, it enables us to test products more cheaply.
Yeah.
Because if you reduce humans only to tool users, therefore you are able to ignore large swathes of what it is actually to be a human being. So this delimitation of what it is to be human means that it's a very inward looking sense, and it's creating, and I do find, I mean, certainly the more I work on a lot of the perception and sensing stuff, that the world of what it is to be human is vast, extraordinarily vast, and that was one of the end themes of yesterday's workshop. And that's that we really need to properly consider our humanity.
Yeah, it's almost like we've made it simple for ourselves to survive in some of our working environments, that it's just too complex sometimes. So some of these narrowing, it's a narrowing strategy to allow us to get through.
It's and again, it's an entirely practical response to the way in which design and UX and all these and service design are all viewed within the context of corporate product management and corporate product creation. That the messy things to do with user research, to do with research before product, the things to do with agile in terms of, are you asking the right question? All of these things which are messy and difficult to fund, and therefore the reaction is to reduce them down in order to minimize friction with other parts of the departments of the corporation. And yet in each of those tiny steps back, you start building a wall between what it is that you are testing as a user and what you are testing as a human.
Exactly. And we're so focused on interfaces, usually forgetting about the thresholds in between them, but also forgetting that humans are so used to shifting between ways of looking at the world. I think that's one of your core messages that I took away from it was we context shift all the time, constantly, and this is something that we don't really think about when we're designing.
Yeah, I mean, when I wanted to reframe to the human focused and human-centered perspective on information, the reason I want to do that was because I keep seeing all of these diagrams and all of these sort of discussions of the sort of the massive complexity of information in terms of what we have both now and what we're looking at in terms of augmented and virtual realities and all the rest, and mixed realities. And yet, from a human perspective, these kind of apparently impossible situations is something that humans have done forever.
Yeah.
In terms of moving between that book you're reading, that daydream you're having, that walk you go on, that phone you look at, these are all switches between different forms of reality, and we choose, and we have good choice systems. We manage it. From a human perspective, this is quite normal. We adapt, we change.
I was also thinking, you brought up yesterday the notion of was it hyperreality?
Hypo-reality.
Yeah, hyperreality, and that made me think a lot about how we spend most of our time adding information elements, adding interface elements or information signage and so on to things to try and make them more understandable. So we're making things more to try and communicate better. Was when you started talking about hyperreality, where you potentially take things away. So I started wondering about the future of design, that some of the aspects of future design would be maybe helping blur, so it's helping tone things down. That you would take away things to make it more understandable.
Yes, I mean, I have many friends who use different forms of headphones and different forms of coloured lens, sort of analog solutions, to actually adjust their perception of the world,
right.
because they need to control and have a sense of control and agency over how they see and perceive the world around them, because it's too loud, it's too bright, and therefore there are many ways in which people are already doing this. To some extent, it's just that those purposes and those people, for the most part, these are people with cognitive impairments. They're not viewed. Well, they're not seen by the industry, and therefore that there is a whole behaviour area of ways in which we deal with this and ways in which we manage this, which are just the design industry is unaware of, and yet it's there, and it will become probably more important over time.
Yeah. And now I've suddenly thought of an episode of Black Mirror.
Oh, really?
Episode of Black Mirror where they effectively use augmented reality or hybrid reality to block people. Basically, if someone basically you get angry with them, and you basically mute them, and you can't see them or hear them or anything. They become just basically a whited out figure in their world.
Yeah,
it's like there's China Miéville's novel, The City in the City, which is a nice. I mean, it's a detective novel, but it's a novel which is nice because it talks of a city. Well, it talks of two cities who are very close to each other and which people travel between, and they're different cities. But, and there is a spoiler warning in this, but actually they all live in the same city. It's just the two groups of people dress in different forms of clothing, and they are trained from birth not to see people wearing certain types of clothing. The two cities literally physically are co-located, but the populations cannot see each other. They cannot perceive each other. It's a beautiful conceit.
That's scary.
It is, yes.
It's similar to when you think about multiple dimensions. So if you get into like fifth dimensions and so on, where there can be beings existing on a dimension that we can't perceive.
Yes, I mean, sort of the intersectionalities. I mean, there's a whole area of stuff which got cut from the workshop to do with homological space, which is a much larger sense of information design over space and time, which got deleted because it would have been too much.
Yes, I think that was probably a sensible decision.
It's really interesting, but it is something which it's a way of actually reframing a lot of the way we think about information by actually really understanding how objects and artifacts move through time, and it's but yes, too much for 3 hours.
Yeah, I think so.
So, in a sense, you're not part of the UX design industry, and in a big sense, you really are as well, because you're constantly being invited by the UX industry to speak. Why do you think that is? And if you put your critical glasses on, what is your perception of the UX industry?
I mean, I came across the UX industry, 2013, and have been working with projects and with companies and yes, and certainly in conferences since then. I think on one level, I'm invited along simply because because I come out of sensory and accessibility design. I do have very, very strong opinions on what being human-centered actually means. And secondarily, I think it's because I'm also both willing to, and to a certain extent now permitted to, talk and workshop through subjects that have no meaningful benefit in the next 2 weeks of people's careers. And yet I get feedback from people months down the line telling me that they actually understood what I was trying to get at. In a sense that I don't want to talk about, and I can't talk about practical process and stuff, because I don't work with I do not work in the industry in that sense. But I intersect with it enough to be able to know the sort of issues which are around and the sort of tools. And I'm therefore aware of where there are gaps, because I am from a slightly askew angle on the whole thing, and therefore I'm interested in trying to describe the spaces which look like they will be something the industry will be coming across at some point in the next 2 years.
Yeah.
And that's mostly what I try, and that's, I think, why therefore I get invited to do conferences, is I'm willing to put people through experiential workshops, because I believe experiential is the way to be able to make people and enable people to understand. I need people to understand the thing themselves. I can't just tell people. They need to actually live the experience to understand what the heck's going on. And then I'm allowed to do weird crap. I am permitted because I am known for doing it. Therefore, therefore there is a relationship in that sense that I can go and make people go for walks. I can have people play with Jenga in a way that many people probably are not permitted.
True.
Because there is this sense that the process and the tool must be concretely connected to work process as it exists now, and that very, very specific connection to it has to be locked against what we are already doing means that the industry can only move very, very incrementally forward on certain subjects. Yet sometimes you actually need to be able to bound over to be able to say, but the space you're entering is extraordinarily huge, and we at least need to have some idea of what that space might be. A lot of the time, I don't have answers on a lot of this stuff, but at least people may have a better way of considering the possibilities.
I think you're actually allowing us to understand ourselves better and the world we're in better, ourselves as humans, allowing us then to make these leaps when we have to in the industry. Now we need to start looking at it this way, because now we've done this already. Now we need to start looking at it in another way. I think that lasting impression is really what I love about what you do. It's fantastic. Thank you so much for sitting down with us, Alastair.
Certainly. Thank you.
During the interview of Alastair, we mentioned the the wonderful picture he took and actually incorporated into his slides that about be the dog. But I want to give a bit more. I want to describe that a little bit more to the listeners. That Alastair being Alastair, he was wandering around in the area surrounding the hotel that the URI conference was being held at, and he'd spotted a man, and this was a man walking his dog, and the dog was having a really good sniff. It was sniffing everything around it. It was taking in the world that it was experiencing and giving the world time to share its experiences. And of course, the dog's connected by a lead to its owner, and the man, he's stood by the side of the dog, waiting for his dog, but he's just staring at his telephone. In the actual picture, you can see that there's a path. It's a gravel path. There's a curb. There's a bush. There's of course a dog. There's a small boat. There's a waterway. There's a railing. There's a rock face. I think there's a building, or it might even be. I think it's an office building in the background, or in a high raised bridge. There's a car. There's so much going on in this picture. The guy's looking into his telephone. So Alastair put some labels on this, and there's a big arrow sign that says, "Don't be this," pointing to the man. "Be the dog," pointing to the dog. And just that one picture, though, I think it sums up so much of what Alastair was trying to, or is teaching and trying to get us to understand.
Yeah, I agree. It's amazing, and that's what he really forced us to do, to actually be the dog and go out and listen to sounds in a way that you usually don't do, and look around, smell, look at colors, the sizes of different things.
Listen.
It's just
listen to things.
There's so much we miss that is going on out there. And the funny thing about I listen to the subtext, sort of what Alastair is saying. He's almost mocking us because you're calling yourself a human-centered designer as a UX designer, but I mean, you almost have no idea of what human-centered is because you're working with these screens and these interfaces, but you don't work with the whole complete human being. So he's saying,
exactly.
He's looking 2 years into the future, and he's looking at, this is where you have to go. So he's preparing us for that movement towards understanding humans in a more broad sense.
Yeah, we've got the user experience designers, and we're talking about users, and as Alice has said about we've reduced humans to users, and we've cut off our senses. We've boxed ourselves in, and to do human-centered design, you have to be a more human designer, and part of being a more human designer is properly considering the real world around you.
Exactly. Understanding what it means to be human, because the danger is that we're forgetting when we're categorizing people into these, or compartmentalizing them into these groups, we're forgetting what it means to be a human with the full experience of what is going on throughout the day. And people have these thresholds. They're filtering out some stuff, looking at other stuff. I was thinking of, actually, there's been a campaign in Sweden where you have ADHD children who want to wear baseball caps inside. And usually that's considered rude, usually in most Western cultures. But for them, for the people who are struggling in school, or the children who are struggling in school, wearing these, it helps them filter out parts of their environment that keep them from concentrating well. So in my reality, wearing a baseball cap indoors may be perceived as rude, but in their reality, it's a coping mechanism to manage their life. And we need to be able to see these differences in how we approach reality and what we are experiencing differently as different individuals. Going throughout a day and going through your city, you're seeing different stuff depending on who you are. Usually people just ignore and filter out aspects of city life, like the homeless people or the people who are trying to sell you stuff, things that you think are for tourists. And we're filtering out stuff all the time. But sometimes we can become conscious of them if somebody forces us to.
Yes, exactly. And in Alice's workshop, when he forced us to create portals, thresholds, related to a world close by to us. So then we went outside and experienced those portals and thresholds in real life. So the group I followed, we went into the hotel, went outside the hotel, but then made our way back into the hotel because we were gonna have lunch was the task that we tried to follow. So then each time you go through one of the portals, whether it's the door to the hotel or the door into the restaurant, and so on, you really kind of think about what happens, what information am I taking in, what information do I need at this point in order to make it successfully through the portal.
Right. And there's things happening between the portals as well, and you may take up your phone, and that becomes a portal. So I mean, it's just all those, what you might call them touch points. I don't know if we can use other stuff that we can relate to, but I think you mentioned that.
Yeah, well, it seems. We talked to Andrea Mimini in episode 144.
Yeah.
He talked a lot about cross-channel ecosystems, and he mentioned thresholds, of course, but he also talked about seams, where thresholds touch each other. But that's I think it's similar to what I was saying with portals and thresholds, that they you go from one space into another space.
And just that, I mean, that what Alastair did was he actually created a portal for us within the workshop, because he works with experiential workshops. He made the workshop very physical. He made the participants a part of the presentation. So if we didn't do our part in the presentation as he was moving along, the presentation couldn't continue. So we were learning what he was doing to us. He was designing the workshop so that we would be able to understand the information better by using our senses more. And I think that's what we need to take away as designers, that we can do what Alastair does in designing experiences as well, using more of what it is to be human.
Yeah, I love the whole kind of reverse thinking of some of this, because we focus so much on kind of like, I suppose, pimping, puffing up and making experiences more delightful, kind of more exciting, exhilarating, entertaining, all these things. Whereas Alistair talks about de-augmenting, so reducing, so you can allow focus, like you said about maybe putting the cap on to help you focus, or you put kind of noise cancelling headphones on to reduce noise, so you can actually focus on the person you're actually trying to talk to or trying to listen to. There's ways in which we could work better maybe as designers to reduce noise in designs in order to allow people to survive experiences.
Exactly.
There's also some additional content from our chat with Alastair. We recorded a special event clip called Journey Number 6.
Oh yeah, of course.
Where we geek out a little bit on one of these experiential journeys to do with taking bus number 53 from the hotel into town. It's really good fun to listen to.
They're obviously aware of all these problems, because there are many problems, and everybody's talking about them at the conference.
Must be awful having a kind of 250 UXers and information architects at your hotel.
Yeah, why do you fail to see that there is a solution to the frustration that guests are expressing? This is what interests me. Why don't they see, or why aren't they interested in solving that? Because it's now becoming just part of this experience of the hotel.
Well, I mean, people become habituated to their environments. I mean, this is, when I do sensory audits for museums and visitor attraction places, one of the key things about that is taking management around the place and slowing them down enough to actually notice the things which are paining their customers. Yeah. And yet they walk through those buildings day in, day out, but they can't see it. And again, this is this thing about perception and the way that sort of human beings can delete out aggravating things if they see it enough. And so it is natural. And again, it is one of these things of actually sort of when trying to deliver and design this stuff, of really forcing yourself back into a state of actually being able to see stuff as a human being, because otherwise you'll begin to lose contact with why you have an endless stream of slightly aggravated customers turning up.
But I think almost the saddest aspect of the variations of Journey Number 6 I've put myself through this conference is I've now learnt them. So if this conference should happen, it won't do, but it should happen to come back to this hotel next year, the journey will be completely different, because I know exactly how to take myself from bus number 53 down to the hotel entrance. I know exactly how to park my car. Those processes now have assimilated them.
Yes, and that's of course the issue of adaptability and compliance of humans. That people will comply to a system even if the system doesn't make sense.
So thank you for joining us today. As Persis mentioned, we will have show notes from this episode on the website, uxpodcast.com. They should also be available in your podcast client. If you aren't already a subscriber to us, then please add us to your podcasting client of choice.
Remember to keep moving.
See you on the other side.
Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Rudolph.
Rudolph who?
Money is the root of all evil.
Oh, it's not even Christmas.